What a pretty name. And it belongs to me now.
I'm back for another Spirited Away video. For anyone that isn't aware, I've been going through the film scene by scene, pretty much line by line, analysing the entirety of it. And the last video is up on the channel in one big 49-minute block that analyses the very beginning of the film right the way through to Chihiro crossing over the bridge and failing to hold her breath. So if you wanted to watch that one first, I'll link it here in the description, the comments, all that stuff. But that's what we're doing today anyway. Picking up from where I left off and going through the film carefully and chronologically analysing the lot. But if I spend any longer introducing the video, it's going to end up pretty long, so let's just get straight into it. Last time we left off here with Chihiro and Haku hiding away in this little garden, having failed to cross the bridge without being seen. So there's now a big commotion going on around the rest of the bathhouse about this strange human that's been spotted. You hear voices calling for Haku, which means Chihiro now has to do the next bit on her own, which is not something she's ready for yet.
I'll create a diversion while you escape.
No! Don't leave me! I don't want to be alone!
She doesn't have a choice though, as Haku points out very calmly to her. I think his calmness is crucial here because he seems to instinctively trust that Chihiro will be able to manage what's needed. Which obviously she will, but she doesn't believe it yet. So I think his calmness, the fact he so clearly trusts her, is a big part of what helps her find her inner courage right now. He explains the plan. She has to sneak down the stairs right to the very bottom where she'll find Kamaji in the boiler room. She'll have to ask him for a job, and no matter how many times he refuses her, she has to keep asking until he gives in. Now in my eyes this is kind of the beginning of Act 2, let's say. Act 1 in the film was Chihiro entering the spirit world, seeing her parents get turned into pigs. It's the part of the film where we as an audience are introduced to this world and slowly adjust to the fantasy here as we gradually realise, okay, this is a very bizarre, fantastical film full of spirits and magics. Act 2 is now Chihiro getting and working a job, which is interesting. Because out of all the fantasy films you can think of, how many centre around the main protagonist just getting a job? Normally they're full of big wars and uprisings and all sorts, but not Spirited Away, you know, there's no war in Spirited Away. No battle, not even any real fight scenes. Because this is a point I've touched on before, but the reason this film centres around Chihiro having to get a job in a strange fantasy world is because that's what our lives centre around growing up. This film is about growing up, coming of age in a lot of ways. And we all have to leave the safety of school behind to enter the very strange, alien, sometimes scary world to find a job, find our place in it somehow. I admire this film immensely for that fact alone, because getting a job and finding our place is a very real thing that we all struggle with growing up. Not having to fight a war against an evil king or overthrow a tyranny or any of that stuff, but getting a job. This is what we truly struggle with, and the film finds a way to explore that without sacrificing any of the fantasy feel. So that's the basic idea of Act 2 in this film as far as I see it. It's what this video will focus on mostly. Haku explains that if Chihiro doesn't get a job, Yubaba, who's the witch in control of the bathhouse, will turn her into a pig. And you see the struggle in Chihiro's face as he explains everything. She looks like she might burst into tears, but she's also trying her best to keep focused on what he's saying. And we're still hearing the commotion. People are still calling for Haku, and I like the way it's framed so we just see their legs running back and forth past the windows here. It makes it feel even more chaotic, even more hurried. It conveys without need of explanation that the spirits here aren't used to having a human in the bathhouse, that it's a terrible thing that panics them. We don't know why yet, but the fact they don't want humans is made very clear to us. Plus, it also adds a level of tension and panic to what Chihiro's got to do because Haku is rushed away. As he gets up, he says,
And don't forget, Chihiro, I'm your friend.
Which seems a very ominous thing to say as you leave, but we'll see why he says it shortly. Anyway, now that Haku leaves, the commotion dies down and Chihiro is left alone in total silence. The suddenness of this silence is effective. It adds to the terrifying sense that she is now completely on her own with no support. She takes a moment to bury her head in her knees, and it's great the animators bothered to include these little details because it conveys so much more emotion. You know, no dialogue needed, you empathise fully with this little girl who feels like she has to do something monumental. She takes a moment, then she crawls forwards. And the shot here changes. I talked about how the film uses lots of establishing shots to give you a clear understanding of the bathhouse geography. Well, we know that the bridge was where we were earlier. Now we see Chihiro is just round the corner from it. And symbolically, it also separates Chihiro from the rest of the public, similar to that shot earlier. This is storytelling through the landscape in that sense, just emphasising how much of an outsider she is here. And it's a very slow, very quiet, very long shot of her just edging her way towards the stairs. We see her fear, her hesitancy about what she's got to do. And then we see a shot looking down, which is again helping us with the geography by showing where the train runs whilst also conveying her fear about the height. Really, I don't think there's too much I need to say about this sequence. Chihiro's body language shows her fear brilliantly. The music comes back in that roughly matches the rhythm of her steps. It's music that partly sounds tense, but there's also something quite comical about it in my opinion. Which I suppose makes sense if you consider that whilst this is a scary moment for a little girl like Chihiro, all she is technically doing is walking down a staircase. You know what I mean? It's hardly Daredevil stuff as far as fantasy films go. Later in the film she's going to have to be much braver than this, so whilst it is scary for her now, it might be kind of comical to us. This comical feel is upped anyway as a step breaks and she goes zooming down the stairs, screaming her head off, only to slowly splat against the wall at the bottom. And I guess this itself will prove a lesson for Chihiro, you know, that sometimes cowering and hesitating won't keep you safe. Sometimes you just have to go for it. What she's also learning is she can't whine or complain or panic like she normally would as a mopey girl, because a bloke opens a window above her to smoke out of and Chihiro has to keep silent else she'll get caught. But anyway, she enters the boiler room now, and what I like about this shot is that it makes Kamaji seem like he's going to be really sinister. The shadows moving against the back wall, the sound of the steam from the pipes like Darth Vader, the blood red glow, how slowly Chihiro is moving. On the first viewing of the film you might expect Kamaji to be someone pretty evil, and the boiler itself has a menacing quality to its appearance. Again, this is all storytelling through the landscape, because without Chihiro having to say or really do anything, we understand exactly how scared she must be just looking at all this. And you notice as well the boiler is kind of like a flipped image of Kamaji himself, as it has this face here and is bent wearily forwards. That paints a picture of just how Kamaji is treated here, because the boiler is a tool fed slowly so that it powers the rest of the bathhouse. And if that boiler looks like Kamaji, then we can say the same about him. He's treated like nothing but an instrument here. And we see all the soot workers carrying the coal. They're fun creatures in the film, but when you think about it, they're also technically voiceless slaves here. But Chihiro gets a good view of Kamaji, and to her he looks intimidating. That's the point, I suppose. It won't be till later where we properly see him as this weary old man treated as much like an instrument as the boiler and the soot workers, but right now he seems terrifying, and it's only when break is called that Chihiro plucks up the courage to enter.
Hello? Excuse me?
Chihiro says, and is ignored. Kamaji keeps going with that monotonous grinding of herbs, using a spare arm to drink straight from the teapot, which itself highlights exactly how hard this guy has to work. You know, he doesn't even have time to pour the tea into an actual cup. And I also think it was a clever idea to give Kamaji so many arms, because if you want to convey the idea that he has a ludicrous amount of work to do, having him rush about doing several things at once with just 2 arms, you know, and having to zip all over the place, that would make him look quite fast and energetic. But because he can draw on all these different arms to work simultaneously, you can then animate his movements much slower, which makes him look both incredibly busy and absolutely exhausted at the same time. Kamaji does his best to ignore her anyway, partly because he's a busy man, but I imagine also partly because everybody else ignores him. You know, he's stuffed down here out of the way, so why shouldn't he ignore everyone else too? She asks him for a job and he just dodges it by bitterly explaining,
"Yeah, I'm Kamaji, slave to the boiler that heats the baths."
We've got a real sense that this is the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy here. He calls himself a slave, and in a literal sense he's only marginally better off than the balls of soot. And I like the way Kamaji talks about the soot.
I just cast a spell on them and I've got all the workers I need.
You can almost imagine Yubaba saying that sort of thing about Kamaji. It's a lesson in the fact that when people treat you like lowly scum, you then often look for someone even lower that you can then treat like scum, so that at least you don't have to feel like the worst of the worst. Chihiro's getting in the way, so she apologises. You know, she has no place in this society, so she's physically getting in the way of everything. A moment of change comes though when she spots a soot ball drop the coal on itself. The others just ignore it and carry on, because that's the sort of system they exist in. People aren't meant or expected to care about each other. However, Chihiro does care here. She takes the coal off. The soot offers no thanks and just gets back to work, carrying a new piece of coal, so not knowing what to do with the coal she's now holding, Kamaji tells her,
"Finish what you started, human."
Human said like it's a derogatory term. She carries it to the furnace, but it's incredibly heavy for her. You know, I guess literally we can assume that this must be some sort of magic coal that's particularly heavy. However, metaphorically it tells us Chihiro is not used to any work of any kind. She is determined nonetheless. You can give her that. You know, 1 minute ago she was being told she couldn't have a job, the next she's carrying coal. And then the Subbles try to exploit her willingness to work, because again, that's the society of the bathhouse. Care for no one, take what you can. This annoys Kamaji though, and he lashes out at Chihiro, saying the sort of cruel things immigrants get told everywhere.
You can't just take someone else's job. There's no work for you here, got it? Try somewhere else.
Am I saying that this is a point about immigration, where an outsider who's called human, like it's a derogatory term, is told there's no work for her here and she has to go somewhere else? No, I won't say that's necessarily what this is about, but it is a useful interpretation to pick up on. Chihiro is technically an outsider in a different world, and her great quest for most of this film is to get a job, so the idea is relevant then. But anyway, the Soot's now also angry at Chihiro too. They've all been a bit cold and uncaring towards her, just as everybody's been cold and uncaring towards them. This is the difference though. Seeing this society treat her like scum, does Chihiro then turn equally cold and uncaring? No. She remains open and compassionate and respectful towards everyone, no matter how badly they treat her in this film. And later on we'll see just how the kindness and openness of one little girl is able to have a massive effect on the society around her. But that's not yet, that'll come later. For now, as a sort of related point, there's a pattern in this film with introducing characters. At first they appear pretty scary and cruel, then their nicer side starts to shine through afterwards. Haku seemed very stern at first, but then he was caring. Lin enters the room, and suddenly Kamaji seems like an innocent, addled old man who just needs a bit of looking after.
Where's your other bowl from yesterday?
And then after Lin calls out Chihiro,
A human! You're in trouble. You're the one everyone's looking for.
Kamaji then acts quite nicely now. She's my granddaughter, he lies.
She said she wants to work here, but I've got all the help I need. Will you take her to see Yubaba? She's a tough little girl.
Lin doesn't want to help Chihiro, not so much out of any prejudice against humans, but that,
I'm not gonna risk my life.
you know, the bathhouse is a world where people look out for themselves and themselves alone. They take what they can whenever they get the chance, and so fittingly she has to be bribed with a roasted newt before she'll help. Food is another big motif in this film as well. You know, we've had the food that turns Chihiro's parents into pigs, the food that stops Chihiro fading away, we've had this food that just eased Kamaji's temper, and now the roasted newt that bribes Lin. People often link foods to greed in this film, which it is when eaten in excess, but it'd be wrong to see that as the only reason. So following the same pattern, Lin's really cold towards Chihiro here, and then she'll be nicer later on.
Can't you even manage a yes ma'am or a thank you?
Yes, ma'am.
What a dope. Hurry up.
We then get some wonderful shots of the inside of the bathhouse as they make their way up to Yubaba. We've seen the dark, exhausted bottom of the boiler room with jagged gears and stifling flames. Next up in this social hierarchy we see the cooks. Then we see the bright, jolly, luxurious front of the bathhouse. So whilst it's pretty dark and depressed behind the scenes, the service they give has to look perfect. You know, that's not a big point, it just gives us a clear understanding of the society of this place. Poorly treated workers at the bottom, the false front for customers above, and then, as we'll see in a minute, the rich, decadent owner Yubaba who's at the very top. The radish spirit though. What am I supposed to say about the radish spirit? You know, the channel Story Dive, which actually reached out to me and helped when my last Spirited Away videos were getting taken down. His video on Spirited Away points out that
in Japanese, the radish spirit is called Oshira-sama. This is a real Shinto deity and patron of silk production. However, the common representation of Oshira-sama in Shinto are bamboo sticks adorned in cloth, rather than a giant, fat radish creature.
The silk production point is an interesting one that could link him to No-Face, who also has an association with silk. However, for the most, I don't know what to say about the radish spirit, so leave any thoughts you might have. I will say this though, the radish spirit's appearance is pretty grotesque. You know, he's fat, smelly, he's barely covered himself with that cloth. You see his nipples, and I'm not going to say what these look like. You get the picture there. He unnerves Chihiro, and she feels deeply unsettled at the idea of being crushed up in a tight space with him. You know, I'm saying this to make a point I personally disagree with, but you might not, because there is some decent evidence, which is why I'm telling you. You know that film theory about Spirited Away, that the bathhouse is actually a place of prostitution and Chihiro being a child and all that uncomfortable stuff? You know, it's a popular theory that's been floating around for years. Probably gaining traction because people often like the idea of a dark, disturbing underbelly to nice children's stories. You know, the fact we enjoy film theories like that in the first place probably says a lot about us as humans, really. I disagree with the theory anyway, but there is some decent evidence to back it, and the radish spirit may add some, as this fat, grotesque, half-naked customer that presses up close to Chihiro. You see where I'm going, you know? Maybe that's what you take the radish spirit to be about. Maybe. On the flip side, however, you can say he's a pretty good guy who helps Chihiro. You know, the reason he follows her, as far as I can understand, is because his bad smell will help to hide Chihiro's human smell. Plus, it's hard to see past his giant size in the lift, so he keeps her hidden, and he goes higher up the lift than he wanted just so Chihiro can get to her floor safely. And then they bow to each other as they leave. We also see in this moment with Lin and the frog bloke just how valuable roasted Nuke clearly is here. Kamaji gave up something incredibly expensive just to help Chihiro, you know, so maybe he's quite a nice bloke. Maybe he was only lashing out earlier just because of the stress of his job, you know. Yubaba's floor anyway looks exactly like you'd expect it to look. It's a dark and scary kind of witch's lair. The only flowers there are a very cold blue colour, and they look incredibly withered. In fact, they might even just be painted on the wall. It's hard to tell from this shot, but there's nothing much natural to this place. The space is vast and open, and everything is polished and rich and overly luxurious. This is someone who clearly flaunts all the wealth that her deprived workers earn her. This is the reverse of Kamaji's floor at the bottom as well. You know, everything may be equally dark, but it gleams here, and it's all deathly quiet where the boiler room felt denied of any moment's peace. The vases are ludicrously big, there's Roman pillars, there's two big red doors, you know, we don't know where the other one leads, but there's duality to Yubaba throughout this film with her twin sister Zaniba, so the symmetry of it makes sense. This shot from up above the lamp looking down on her conveys her weakness here. Just how small she is, you know, and the music only returns when she looks at this symbol of Yubaba. An eerie stab of piano. Danger is quite clearly ahead, which, remember, is what the film was telling us in the lead up to Kamaji. Danger. Back then we felt like Chihiro was entering an evil lair when she wasn't, so maybe Yubaba won't actually be evil as well? Spoilers, she does come across evil, Yubaba. It's quite evil and scary, but we'll get to that soon. For the moment there's this door knocker which scolds Chihiro for not knocking and calls her rude, just as Lin also criticised Chihiro for her manners. You know, something we'll learn is kind of a stereotype they have about humans in this film, that they're rude. I think this is a really clever way of introducing the main villain of the film as well. The fact we see her lair long before we actually see her. Nobody opens the door physically, she opens them magically, a whole row of doors, which just cements in our minds how very powerful Yubaba must be. And then we see an extreme close-up that only captures her mouth and nose. No eyes yet, no full sense of a face. She tells Chihiro to come in, but she needs a moment to brace herself. However, Yubaba's impatient and it's a good way to assert her dominance, so she uses magic to just drag Chihiro in. Which also gives us our second shot of Yubaba now, her jewelled hand. Building up even more of a sense of her power in our minds, the scale of this person, in a metaphorical sense. And it's just clever storytelling, you know, she's barely spoken yet, we know she's powerful, she likes to intimidate, she's rich, she likes to flaunt that wealth, and obviously that she knows magic. So in goes Chihiro. The doors all lock behind her, which confirms the sense of danger, and there's a complete labyrinth here before we reach Yubaba's room, which itself tells us a lot about Yubaba, that she's designed her home and her offices to deliberately confuse anyone other than herself to find their way. I think it says a lot about a person's emotional outlook on the world if they deliberately make it impossible for anyone to find or reach them, you know? But anyway, Chihiro gets unceremoniously thrown into the office, rolling across the carpet in front of a darkly burning fire, and everything feels very grand again. And despite the fact Yubaba's right there in this room, there's still no clear shot of her yet. Instead, we get a very long time to just focus on Chihiro. And what even are these things? Like the radish spirit, I'm not entirely sure, and if you have any ideas, please write them in the comments. If anything, they seem to be Yubaba's pets, which, if that's true, maybe tells us something more about her. You know, that she doesn't choose a nice dog or some fluffy animal that you'd feel affection for. Instead, she takes 3 decapitated heads. Pretty stern, strong looking heads as well. You know, I think they look like they came from the bodies of ferocious warriors. These heads would be very formidable if they each had a body to sit upon. As it is though, they've been severed and reduced to this, which, if it's Yubaba's doing, is incredibly cruel. We know she's capable of turning humans into pigs. Were these 3 once brave warriors who crossed Yubaba, so she's reduced them to a life of mindlessly jumping around her office? Yubaba says to
Quiet down, you're making a racket.
And it's unclear if she's talking to the heads or Chihiro, but it gives us our first clear shot of Yubaba now. Still not a full picture, but enough to see properly. She's writing something, probably sorting out her accounts, which again tells us how obsessed she is with her riches. But the fact she summoned Chihiro into this office and then not looked at her, not spoken to her. 20 seconds have passed since Chihiro entered her office, and Yubaba seems to pay her no attention, which just asserts Yubaba's dominance even more. I mean, I think you see this effect in a lot of movies. A boss that summons someone into their office only to then leave them waiting while they focus on something else. You know, it makes them seem incredibly powerful, like they're the ones who dictate the tempo and the speed of the conversation. And then another 20 seconds pass where Chihiro is just left standing to attention, not quite sure what to do. Yubaba's in total control.
Excuse me. I was wondering if you could give me a job.
Which is interesting from a power play point of view, because Chihiro's supposed to stay silent and stand to attention and wait until such a time Yubaba's ready to deal with her. That's what's supposed to happen, but that's not Chihiro. She breaks the silence herself, not because she's trying to assert her own power though, but simply because she was told by Haku that she has to ask for a job and she has to be persistent about it. You know, there's something slightly naive about Chihiro here. She thinks there's nothing wrong or rude in politely asking for a job because she's simply not aware of the etiquette in this situation. Of the fact she's supposed to stay silent and stand to attention. She doesn't realise that. So, in that sense, it's not she's actually defying Yubaba at all by speaking out. It's just that she's still quite innocent and naive and oblivious to the situation. However, from Yubaba's point of view, Chihiro is being incredibly rude to interrupt her while she's sorting her accounts. Yubaba wants Chihiro only to speak when spoken to, so from Yubaba's perspective, Chihiro does seem very rude, which again adds to this stereotype that all humans are rude and lack manners. Yubaba zips Chihiro's mouth shut and then starts to taunt her.
You're just a stinking, useless weakling. And this is certainly no place for humans.
There's a bit of exposition about the bathhouse snuck in here while she starts lighting a cigarette, giving her some serious Cruella de Vil vibes.
And you humans always make a mess of things, like your parents who gobbled up the food of the spirits like pigs. They got what they deserved.
Which first confirms that Yubaba did that to Chihiro's parents, and secondly adds to this sense that nobody here likes humans. This rude criticism is an important one I've mentioned a few times now, so I might as well address the general point of it across the film. All this talk about good manners and everything Chihiro's supposed to show, it doesn't or wouldn't make her a nicer person, because it's got nothing to do with being nice and everything to do with sucking up. We see the bathhouse workers constantly showing good manners and bending over backwards for the customers and for Yubaba because this is their system. They're forced into submission and made to suck up. You know, how they treat someone below them is entirely different. So Chihiro herself isn't actually rude, she's just sincere. She's herself, she's not one to grovel, which is a strength. However, because the workers here are expected to grovel, that makes her seem rude. And sure, Chihiro does learn some politeness in small ways across this film, but the point is she never grovels. You know, she's never polite in an attempt to gain something from it. She's just respectful and compassionate in the same way to everyone she sees because she's a kind person. That's the difference.
You could be a piglet, or maybe you'd prefer a lump of coal.
I think it's easy to get wrapped up in the wonder of this film and forget how terrifying that actually is. You know, is she suggesting some lumps of coal might actually be humans? Or that there's been other people before her parents who got turned into pigs that were then slaughtered and eaten? It might be she's just saying that to try and scare Chihiro though, you know, she certainly seems to enjoy messing with her. And we cut to a shot where Chihiro is shivering in either fear or sadness. Since her mouth is zipped, she can do nothing else. And I really like this shot. We see nothing of Chihiro except for her back shivering in fear, which silences her even more. Not only can she not speak, but we can't even see her face now. And we see clearly how everything in this room is pretty much the same dark red colour, which is meant to make it look very grand, but there's so much of it with no other colours to offset it that it becomes kind of sickly and too rich. Her desire to flaunt her majesty ruins the beauty of this room in that sense. She lacks taste, so Yubaba zipped her mouth shut and has now scared her into shaking with all these threats. She thinks she's broken Chihiro now, and so she asks Chihiro to tell her who it was that helped her get to the office.
Just who was it, dear? Why don't you tell me?
Please, can't you give me a job?
Chihiro hasn't been broken. I like this because it's not some great heroic act of strength from Chihiro. You know, normally in films when you see characters in this sort of situation where someone is trying to break them, they make all sorts of clever little quips to show their defiance, but Chihiro is technically just whining for a job. You know, that's all. However, the fact she's persistently doing that and not doing it in a on her knees crying and begging sort of way, just persistently asking shows a great deal of courage. Yubaba gets angry though because she wanted to break Chihiro.
Anyone can see you're a lazy, spoiled crybaby and you have no manners.
Is a great point because to some extent it is true. You know, the film started with Chihiro sulking over everything, and maybe the very whiny way she keeps asking for a job does lack some manners and seem a bit spoiled, and yet, if we look a little deeper, we can already see Chihiro is so much more than that. She has made it this far. She has remained persistent. She's not so lazy and spoiled as she did first seem. Yubaba tells Chihiro to get out, however she then changes her mind with a threat.
Maybe I'll give you the most difficult job I've got and work you until you breathe your very last breath.
And I think a lot of people have said about the very spidery way she moves her fingers here, which is great, you know. And Chihiro is tiny compared to her. Yubaba's eye is almost as big as Chihiro's entire head. See, that's the sort of thing you can only do in animation. You know, you can't symbolically give a character a very spidery feel in a live action, nor can you make their eyes gigantic. And Chihiro is rightly terrified, so she should be. Personally, I think there's nothing more humanising than making your heroes terrified when they're faced with danger. It just makes it all the more powerful when they do finally succeed. Chihiro is saved by the disruption from Yubaba's kid, which is apparently called Bo. It's easier if I call him Bo, but I'm pointing it out now that he's called Bo in case you're confused and forget his name later on. He's called Bo. He breaks the door open and cries for Mum. And this moment is important, I think, because I said earlier about Kamaji built up with all this tension to seem someone really scary, and then actually he wasn't at all. He was just a bit overworked and slightly bitter about his job. Now we've had Yubaba built up into this terrifying evil witch, the epitome of the evil witch cliche. And I mean, I suppose she is, you know. She may very well have killed Chihiro had not Bo interrupted right now. And she does definitely do a lot of cruel things. However, at the same time, here's this more innocent side that even the most evil of people in this entire film seems to have. Suddenly this scary image we've built up of her is punctured and she doesn't seem quite so powerful and just seems a bit motherly now. Bo will return later in the film, so we'll talk about him more then. For now, it's enough to say Yubaba clearly dotes on him to an unhealthy, spoiled level.
Mommy's here, be a good boy now.
He's a tantrum child, the exact sort of spoiled crybaby Yubaba just accused Chihiro of being, you know? Either way, this moment strips Yubaba of her intimidating, powerful presence. And she tells Chihiro to leave, but Chihiro won't. She stays and demands a job now. You know, she realises she has some leverage to bargain, so she says,
I'm not leaving till you give me a job!
To which Yubaba agrees, provided Chihiro just stays quiet. And you might ask, why would Yubaba give in so long as Chihiro stays quiet when she could have just zipped her mouth shut again? And I'd struggle to answer that because it's a very good question. You can definitely argue the fact that Yubaba does give in is a bit weak. However, I will say this to sort of defend it. One, we've already seen Yubaba was kind of excited about the idea of giving Chihiro the hardest job possible and then watching her suffer, which is sort of what she does go on to do, but secondly as well...
Can't believe I took that oath. To give a job to anyone who asks.
I can't remember if it's explained later in the film why she took this oath or not. Maybe it will pop up later into the analysis, but the point is she always had to give Chihiro a contract from the moment Chihiro asked for it. All the intimidation and threats and insistence that she won't give out a job was just an attempt to try and get Chihiro to give up and walk away, but she stayed. Just like she stayed when Kamaji told her to clear off. And because she stayed, Yubaba is under oath to give her the job. Plus there's also the threat that
If I hear one little complaint out of you, you'll be joining your parents in the pig pen.
which does pretty much mean Yubaba now has power to do whatever she wants with Chihiro. You know, that's the catch. Because think about it. Chihiro needs the job to be able to belong in this world. However, in agreeing to the job, she has to do exactly what Yubaba tells her. She can't refuse or complain about anything, otherwise she'll end up a pig. If that doesn't say something about the world of employment, I don't know what does. You know, she literally has to forfeit her rights just to survive here. And she signs away anyway because she has no choice. And in doing so, she also discovers it's not just her rights she loses, but her identity too, because Yubaba takes her name away and she becomes Sen. I think the last time I mentioned identity in these videos was when Chihiro was fading away into nothing because she didn't belong here, she was out of place. Well, this is what it's taken her to feel like she can belong and won't fade away. She's had to take on a different identity, take on a new name, sacrifice her old one, sacrifice her rights, sacrifice pretty much everything that made her the person she is. She has to take on the personality of someone else in a sense, just to be able to stay here at all. Which again, does that say something about the refugee or immigration experience? You might prefer to see it more generally, just as a point about what it's like for any of us when thrown into a place or community or world where we don't feel we belong. Because we all face times like that at some point in our lives to some small extent, and we all have to find a way to manage. Anyway, in comes Haku, and he's very stern and cold and pretends not to know Chihiro for obvious reasons if you think about it. Yubaba can't know he's the one that helped her, otherwise he'll get punished, so he's very cold to Chihiro. However, we shouldn't forget that this suggests Haku is normally very cold to everyone. You know, if he's pretending like he doesn't know Chihiro and that this is just another ordinary worker he's got to set up with a job, then clearly this is how Haku treats most workers. We've seen his kind side, but no one else here has. This is how he normally acts. So they go down the lift and the silence between them is very awkward. Chihiro tries to speak, but Haku tells her not to talk to him.
And address me as Master Haku.
And Chihiro's confused by it because he hasn't explained, which is something we'll come to in a bit. For now, he takes her to the dormitory or living quarters where they're all clearly cramped for space. They have to hang their washing on lines between floors, and it confirms for us again how neglected and poor these working conditions are. The workers go silent when they see Sen as well. I should probably start calling her Sen now, so again, in case you missed it or something, Sen is Chihiro now that Yubaba's taken away her name and given her this new one, which is Sen.
Answer me, Sen!
The workers there are reluctant to take Sen on because she's human. We see some of the women behind covering their noses from her human Sen. Haku insists they have to take her on, however, because Yubaba's already given her the contract, and
3 days of eating our food and her smell will go away. And if she doesn't work hard, roast her, boil her, do whatever you want.
Then he gives her to Lin. We can assume Haku found out that Lin helped Sen before, so it would make sense to give her to Lin. Like Haku, however, Lin pretends to be unhappy about it until they're out of earshot, when suddenly Lin swings round and says,
I can't believe you pulled it off. You're such a dope. I was really worried.
And you may have noticed that a theme is building up here of people seeming to have two sides. Haku was really kind, then suddenly he's cold. Kamaji was bitter and then caring. The radish spirit was intimidating then helpful. Lin was resentful and reluctant, and now suddenly kind. It happens all throughout this film with a lot of characters and reminds us how flawed first impressions and making quick judgments of people are. But I think it also tells us just how everybody has the potential to grow and change. How people aren't so much good or bad, but that they have the capacity to do good or bad things. Whilst many of the workers seem greedy and selfish early in the film, Sen's own warmth and kindness will later draw out their kindness. But the other thing here is that it obviously confuses Sen. As if this place wasn't already weird enough for her to get her head round, now everybody seems to flick between good and bad. They all feel so unpredictable to her, which makes it impossible to tell who she's supposed to trust and who she isn't. And Lin's nice to Sen here, but Sen feels down.
Now keep on your toes, and if you need anything, ask me, okay?
Okay.
I mean, picture the first time you watch this film. How do we know Haku is a good person at this point? He's Yubaba's right-hand man. How do we know he hasn't tricked Sen into getting a job here just so he gets one extra worker and can maximise profits more? How do we know he hasn't pretended to be nice just to trick her into slavery? And that now she signed the contract, that's it. She's stuck here forever. He's not going to help her find her parents, he's just going to ignore her and insist on being addressed as Master Haku. We don't know that at this point. All we can do is trust, but that's very hard for Sen right now. And this little moment between Lin and Sen is great as well, because Lin notices something is up and asks,
What's wrong?
I don't feel so good.
However, then it cuts away to this transitioning shot of the bathhouse before then coming back to Lin and Sen a bit later on, and you're left wondering, what about the conversation they were just having? Sen said she wasn't feeling good. Did Lin offer comfort or advice? What happened? Instead, we got this strange transition which makes it feel as though Sen's feelings were brushed aside just as this train quickly brushes past the screen. Now Lin is over there and she's introducing Sen to their room. Only as a throwaway comment does she then say,
A little food and some sleep and you'll be fine.
What it leaves us with is a strong sense that Sen has been ignored. Her emotions haven't been listened to. Sen must feel incredibly lonely as a result. I think it's brilliant how just throwing a little transitioning shot in there like that can give you that feeling of someone being ignored. She asks Lin about Haku as well.
There aren't two of them here, are there?
Lin's not particularly listening though, she's busy trying to find clothes that will fit Sen.
2 Hakus? I can barely stand one. He's Yubaba's henchman. Don't trust anything he says.
And then she doesn't ask Sen why she wanted to know or anything, she just gets back to looking for clothes. So Sen's feelings are ignored again. Which isn't exactly a criticism of Lin, you know, it's a product of this environment. People are kept very busy and stressed, so they have less headspace to really pick up on other people's feelings. We, however, know why Sen was asking about Haku, and we can imagine how soul-crushing it must feel for Sen when Lin says, he's Yubaba's henchman, don't trust anything he says. Because trust Haku is exactly what she's done. Does that mean she's made a mistake? So Sen collapses down and cries, which only now forces Lin to really pay attention. But she still doesn't understand, so all she can do is ask,
What's wrong with you? Are you feeling okay?
and rub her back at a slight distance to Sen. And this wakes up someone else sleeping who tells them to quiet down, again giving us the sense there's no space for comfort and empathy in the bathhouse really. That your feelings won't be listened to, you'll be told to quiet down. And even in Lin's response to this,
It's the new girl. She doesn't feel so good.
not it's Sen, but the new girl. Not that she's upset or something emotional that we should try and understand and empathise with, but that she doesn't feel so good, like it's just a stomach bug or something to leave them to get over. And then again, we cut away. So we don't see any more comfort or empathy offered. Instead, we get this very lonely shot of Haku walking up a cold, blue, empty staircase with this bleak music coming in. There's a strong feeling of loneliness being conveyed to us as an audience. I'd say that's the most important emotion here. You know, Sen's no longer sure who she can trust and who she can't. If she can dare trust anyone at all, let alone if anyone will even understand her, because Lin doesn't seem to. The fact we don't see any more of Sen for a while now after this point distances her even further, making her even more lonely, because now what we get is very interesting. And it's a very easy to overlook sequence without any dialogue that runs for about a minute, and it's an incredibly important sequence in my mind. So let's just run through this sequence quickly. We have Haku walking up these lonely steps with his shadow looming large behind him, but then we see his face and he's sort of frowning, sort of keeping this robotic expression. Then we have a shot of the roof with this very dim, bleak looking sky and the doors opening. Yubaba uses her cloak to become a bird so she can fly off somewhere, whilst Haku and the three heads are lined up like servants to see her off. You know, plot wise that tells us there's something Yubaba's gone off to do, and it confirms the bird we saw earlier was indeed Yubaba, and that Haku is indeed Yubaba's henchman, like Lin said. Perhaps the loneliness of this shot could tell us Haku is reluctant to be her henchman though. You know, it doesn't fulfill him. And after she's gone, he just mechanically moves forward and turns off the light, soaking the space in this same cold blue as the outside sky. Then we get a misty blue shot of the bathhouse where it's a silhouette. Then we see the red lights here turning off and giving into the colder blue colours, and only then do we return to Sen. So that's the sequence. What is it about? In many ways I'm repeating myself here because Sen has already given us all the information we need to understand the emotions being conveyed. That she trusted Haku, then she's discovered everybody here seems nice one minute and horrible the next, and she's been told Haku is Yubaba's henchman and that you shouldn't trust him at all, so she feels betrayed, exploited. The heart of a naive, innocent girl is being stamped on by the cruelty of the world here, and like the warmth of your 10-year-old heart dying or burning out, we see a colour shift from bright, well-lit spaces with warm pinks and reds being the dominant colours, now to the colder blues that we first saw in the brief transition shot of the world outside after Sen said she didn't feel so good. You know, now there's all the blues of this sequence where we see all the warmth of the lights being turned off. This is what happens when you stamp on the innocent, trusting heart of a little kid. Their lights go out. They turn cold and hard and almost robotic, exactly like Haku is. So the contrast between him and Sen here, I think, hints to us that he was once in her position, and that this is what the cruelty of this place has done to him. This is arguably the lowest moment in the entire film, and so fittingly we see her unable to sleep, just shivering. She's totally alone. She doesn't feel there's anyone here she can talk to, so she's just trying her best to keep quiet, to keep the sadness in. And you can really imagine that if she was left here alone to shiver without anyone's support, that she would turn cold. That she'd suppress the sadness and become an empty shell like Haku. The same tragedy very nearly happens to her, except the door opens, and in creeps Haku. He comes to where she's sleeping and says,
Meet me at the bridge. I'll take you to your parents.
At this moment in time, this is exactly what Sen needs. Without someone's comfort and kindness and space to let out her emotions, she'd be destroyed. And we're about to have what's probably the most heartfelt scene in this film, where Haku takes her to her parents as the sun rises, and Haku gives her food and reminds her of her name and holds her close as she cries. She needs all of that right now. However, it's quite a long sequence, so I'm going to save that for the next video. Instead, I'm going to finish this one with a quick talk about colour and the use of colour in this film. Because I've set out this change from bright colours with warmer reds and pinks to this colder blue here. Well, it's worth pointing out that this struggle between the two is seen across the entirety of the film. In almost every shot you have pinks set against blues. They're in a constant struggle with each other to win out. How much of life is warm and kind and a thing you can trust and feel love in, and how much of it is cold and harsh and full of greed and people out to exploit you. It's never entirely one or the other, as we see in this film, Chihiro's own heart and own sense of love coming under threat from the cold blues that threaten to turn her into a shell. And as I've said before, that's largely what this film is about in its essence. How does a little girl grow up and enter the big scary world of work without having to sacrifice all the warmth and openness you feel in childhood? How does she grow out of her innocence without killing it? We see all of that play out in the colour scheme. So coming back to this sequence, we've had all the lights turn off. However, the morning is on its way now, and we saw Yubaba fly off, which means Haku has the chance to be himself without her watching over him. She's gone off, which means he now has this chance to help Sen again, so he goes to her. And this dormitory they've got, which is incredibly cramped, by the way, again, the bad working and living conditions of these employees, but the blue colours seem to be winning out here at the moment. The pinks and reds are of course still here, but they're very dim, very cold in themselves. However, then a crack of light enters when Haku opens the door, and after he speaks to Sen, she sits up, and there's a large red curtain now dominating the background. The reds start to win out again. While she's wearing a blue vest, she then picks up the pink top to put over it, and then she comes out of the dormitory into a world now well lit from the rising sun. It's all right there in the colour scheme. The lowest point in this film is dark and blue, and then the sense of hope and love that will follow in this next sequence brings back the sun and the reds and a hell of a lot of pink flowers. I think that's long enough for this video now though. It seems like a good place to stop. Thanks for watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, because these ones take so long to make, and it will no doubt get blocked by Studio Ghibli at some point, so I'll also have to go through the hassle of appealing it, and there's all that. But let me know your thoughts, your comments, anything you want to say or ask. Subscribe if you want to stick around for the next episode of this series. I am going to continue it until I get to the end of the film, and just hopefully see you next time.